I got something really good for you today, man. Okay, it's just a just like a small little recap. But I've been reading. Joe Rogan just recently spoke to Dr. Ben Goertzel. He's like a futurist kind of AI guy. Anyway, super interesting podcast. But it got me thinking about a couple of things, and specifically about consciousness, of course. And so check this. You know how some people kind of like, well, the problem seems to be that you want to transfer our consciousness to like a different medium, right? But then how that's going to work, nobody actually sort of thinks about the actual ego. Like, will your ego as you are today, will you know that you're in a different medium and be like sort of preserved forever?
Yeah.
Right? Because as far
just
as
a copy of you.
Exactly. Now, but here's the thing. What if we do a sort of what if instead of copying you, you're replaced? Now, when I say replaced, I mean we would have to have the technology to copy neurons. So first we'd have to be able to decode your sort of neuronal, I don't know how you would say that. I'm not a neuroscientist, so I don't know the terms. But like your synapses and everything.
Neuronic.
Yeah, neuronic.
No.
But like, so technically, if you could say copy the bio neuron, I'm going to call that bio neuron, which is the neurons that we have biologically speaking. If we could add a synthetic neuron, one that could sort of take on the attributes of a bio neuron, okay, and then over time you sort of gradually replace over time, because it seems to me that consciousness is like, I'm going to use the metaphor or an analogy here, which would be gravity, right? So the relativity between bodies of mass in space, okay, is gravity in a sense, right? So if you see space as like a sort of if you see space as like a fabric, right, and then you put a mass on that fabric, then the curvature of the fabric caused by that mass is the gravity itself that we're talking about, right? Well, I feel like that's a similar thing that's happening with consciousness. I feel as if though consciousness is in actuality the relationship, the relativity between consciousness, which would be, I guess, an innate fabric of the universe, almost like the negative space that's sort of localized between the structures of organization of matter. So that's why, like, if because technically, you know, how they say that it takes around a decade in general to replace the entire body. So your matter completely changes, yet you still have your memories, you still have your, a consciousness that encapsulates an ego over that period of time of your life. So why wouldn't it be that if we can replace, your neurons on that level with synthetic neurons over time, of course, that you would also preserve your ego. You would preserve your consciousness as it is right now in your biological body. It seems to me like it would make sense. What do you think?
I mean, I really opt for the information theory aspect. It's like, there's this weird phenomenon, this thing called the blob. That's what literally scientists are calling it. But it's a new form of life that they haven't been able. It's not a plant. It's not a fungus. It's not a human. It's not an animal or anything. It's not part of any of the main systems yet. Huh? Yeah, but it's biological. Sorry?
Yeah, sorry, there's just some feedback.
And it has no nervous system. But it spreads with these kind of webs. And but yet it manifests types of intelligence that are associated with highly developed forms of neural pathways. And this plays into some of like, Carl Jung, the collective unconscious. I know a lot of people hate Rupert Sheldrake, but his morphogenetic field theory, that kind of stuff. Not to say that they're completely right, but there is some kind of information. We know about the quantum electrodynamic field theory of the body, stuff like that. We don't know if we're damaging these things or not. And also, I mean, if we impose electronics into the body, we know that that disrupts mitochondrial activity, so that can kill biological.
I mean, I mean, I'm taking it further than that. I'm saying that, you know, say you've replaced your biological body and you're just down to your brain. So it's a biological brain inside of a mechanical entity, right?
Pumping blood through it.
Yeah, exactly. So eventually, so apparently the neurons of the brain are the one thing. So apparently at the layer of the brain, the outside layer of the brain where those neurons are, the neurons that are responsible for consciousness, memories, that kind of thing. Apparently those are the ones that can't be replaced. Like, they don't regenerate. So you know,
if they don't regenerate, then how do memories transfer through the period of time where all your systems are getting replaced?
yeah, well, that question would necessitate the idea that memories are exclusively their own matter, their own thing. Do you know what I mean? We shouldn't think of memory in that regard. It's not a sort of thing that gets stored in your brain, like a physical, like a chip or something like that, or like a CD. It's I feel like memory is just a sort of activity of synapses, probably, that gets triggered whenever you have cause to. So for example, if I touch some, like, fire, now the very activity, the neural pathway that was created the first time I've ever touched fire, that gets activated again, and that's probably what memory is. I mean, I'm not a neuroscientist. I have no idea what the fuck I'm talking about. But what I'm saying is,
I mean, neuroscientists are still struggling with these basic questions.
yeah, but probably from my point of view, I don't think memory is like it's not something that's physically stored. I think it has to do with structure, like the neural pathways that gets created in the brain. And that's why I'm thinking, if we put all these things together, that consciousness, it's localized. I mean, if we take the materialistic view, then consciousness is localized. Do you know what I mean? It's localized within, and this would make sense why people feel like transcendence and on these kinds of things. Like Sam Harris would very much agree that a feeling of transcendence is a feeling of connection with everything, you know, and it would make sense why a lot of religious kind of spirituality and all these other sort of like, you know, well, religions all sort of describe God as like a sort of consciousness, a oneness of the universe. And I think that oneness is really, in a sense, the fabric, if you will, the non-materialistic fabric. See, by nature, by virtue of the construct that we live in, that seems to be just well, kind of sort of rounded and just self-sustained, self-contained. You know, just by virtue of that self-containment, it seems like the fabric of our reality allows for a localization of consciousness. Like, as if all of that, the entire structure itself is consciousness. And yet when you have matter within that structure, within that construct, within the construct, the matter that organizes itself into higher and higher kind of complexities, the higher it goes, the more consciousness seems to localize itself in a point. And this would explain why, you know, small insects have a consciousness that's not as complex as ours. So it would mean that if we go up from us, if we go further up, that at some point, you know, if your brain is as big as a house, then, like human brains, if we were to evolve somehow to that degree, that there would be a higher concentration of consciousness within that point, which would be that brain. And so it led me to a couple of other ideas as to what AI is. And, you know, what's been...
Can I just throw this maybe way of putting it?
Yeah.
I mean, reality as a whole is experience.
Yeah.
And then as an individual, it's the personal experience. So it's all experience. But then if you structure it into an individual, it becomes personal experience. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Which consciousness with experience.
Yeah. But here's the thing. So here's how it ties into artificial intelligence. I think some people see these things as separate, and I think they will be, but not for very long. And that's number one. Number two, we talk about artificial general intelligence, AGI, right? So that by that people typically mean, or the community anyway, I think mean that, you know, this synthetic intelligence, what's separate from us, it will have attained a point that is similar, or at least the exact same in terms of capacity for intelligence or consciousness as we do, right? So it'll appear just like you appear to me now.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if we go by that definition, which seems to be what people think, the general intelligence of artificial intelligence, I guess, then if we go by that definition, we should naturally think that that's just a marker in time and not a sort of like matter of fact that will have sort of occurred for a certain amount of time. So what I mean is, once we get artificial general intelligence, it will immediately start becoming super intelligent. You know what I mean? Because if by the definition of general we say it has our capacity for consciousness, then you got to put a couple things together. Already the capacity for intelligence, right, for information processing and computing, is already way beyond what the human brain is capable of. Okay, we've got supercomputers that can do multitasking and all these kinds of things. So if you take that into account, and then you also take into account that, you know, it would reach a level where it has the same kind of awareness as we do, and it would appear to us as general, then we know by virtue of what I've just explained that it would immediately just be better. It could very well simulate what we would consider to be a general intelligence. It looks like you, him, and I, and we're just, you know, it's almost like we're interacting with another human. But that's just a simulation of it. That's just its capability of doing that as well. It's kind of like me talking to a 4-year-old. I can get on its level. So I don't think artificial general intelligence really exists, other than as a way of saying that's a marker in time. Once we believe that once we start seeing and feeling that it's actually, once it passes the Turing test, right, that it's actually a human being, it's at artificial general intelligence level, then we'll know at that point that it's way beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, this is still same thing with transferring consciousness. These are both extremely hypothetical. Like, we have zero real evidence that these things are possible.
Oh, of course, yeah. But philosophically speaking, it's a lot of fun to sort of like mind candy, right? But what's interesting though is that we can speculate far into the future like that, or not far, who knows? But if we can speculate in things that aren't in any way kind of empirical, it does give us a little bit of more of a perspective and a framing as to where we are today. So, for example, when it comes to artificial intelligence, like Ben Goertzel seems to state this, is that it's not going to be one artificial intelligence. It'll be like a spawning of just multiple artificial intelligences, and that's where I really have a bit of I guess I'm a little bit hesitant to get into the idea.
Are we recording?
What?
Are we recording?
Yeah, we are recording. Well,
all right.
I'm kind of hesitant as to talk about how if we have multiple intelligences and the nature of human beings, as well as probably what software actually does, we're going to interconnect even more. So I don't see how Ben Goertzel, what he means exactly. He says there will be multiple artificial intelligences in a sense, multiple narrow AIs, sure, but I think the moment that they start being interconnected through the internet, so a means of communication, then this sort of multiplicity of AIs, they don't become so fragmented anymore, right? It will become in a sense an entity, you know.
I mean, yeah, it's hard. How do you define individual versus collective?
That's seems to be the problem with human beings and societies already.
Yeah, And I don't know, man. Like, um, I don't think we should get bogged down by individual claims that are made by AI experts because I hear a lot of different shit from a lot of different people, and these are very small details. If we want to talk about AI as a whole, then sure, but
Okay, let's
yeah,
talk about AI as a whole. So like Gertzel says this as well, that the word artificial intelligence is already not sort of proper because, technically it's not artificial, it's synthetic. And what was his reasoning behind that? Um,
what's the difference? It's
exactly. What's the difference between if it's all about information processing and we are made out of matter, a specific organization of atoms that creates the human brain. So it's a biological brain, but the very same matter that creates this organic tissue also could create, mechanical tissue or whatever. You know what I mean? Like it
that's
could create a.
extremely materialistic reductionist, in my opinion. That's
It is. It is.
very
But what I'm
general.
saying is that's as far as we can take it when it comes to empiricism. We can say if
Yes.
information processing it relies on a materialistic point of view or on a materialistic sort of matter of fact, then technically intelligence isn't artificial, no matter what material the sort of
If it's real intelligence.
yeah. But I mean, then you got to define what intelligence is and all this kind of stuff. But as
That's
far
an
as
important topic when you're talking about artificial intelligence. We're actually, it's funny because those are two words in the sentence.
yeah.
We're harping on artificial, but intelligence is just another one that we have to redefine.
That's an
So
interesting. It's very interesting. Yeah,
those are two terms that are so ambiguous and philosophically powerful, and yet people throw it around like whatever,
yeah.
man. It's
But this is why I want to get into this
yeah,
defining thing because if we can define it properly, then I think from there we can have the proper sort of like perspective, and then we can at least um, think about the future in ways that are probably a lot more convenient or not convenient, but sorry, productive. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think we'll have a foothold that will sort of allow us to see a little bit more clear of a picture of how things actually will turn out. So he says that, we shouldn't really call it artificial. It should be more synthetic. It's a different material, but the intelligence so this is the materialistic reductionist point of view that you're talking about, right?
yeah.
Guys, I'm doing a podcast right now, so if you could just keep it low just for a second. Sorry.
Shush, shush.
We're almost done. We're almost done. So
What?
if that seems to be the case, if that seems to be the case, then let's leave it at that because that's as far as we can prove artificial, right? So we know we'll change that to synthetic. But then, like you said, we go to intelligence. So how do we define intelligence in this as empirically as we can?
But by the way, we could go deeper on the artificial stuff, but
Yeah.
intelligence, fuck, man. uh,
Is it information
it's
processing?
separate from consciousness, first of all.
Is it
Is
what?
it different? Is it different than consciousness? First of all,
Yeah.
that's a good question.
I don't think so. I think. Oh well, no, maybe. Yeah, because technically you need one for the other, right? You definitely need to be conscious in order to. It's a collection. If we think of intelligence as information, but an information that's gathered, a concentrated information, right?
Okay, intelligence to me has a lot to do with problem solving and yeah,
So the
connections.
navigation between information,
Yeah,
that would be problem solving, right?
connections.
I think consciousness is in part, like I said, I think it's in part information,
Okay.
right? At least we know.
Consciousness to me is the awareness of the intelligence. It's
Yeah. Well, I think it's
awareness.
important.
Consciousness is being conscious. It's awareness. It's experience.
It's experience, yes. That's the. I think that's at the highest level. That's at the most empirical level. We know that that's what's happening. I think therefore I am. But on the other levels, like you said, I think if we break it down to those smaller levels, that it's partly information processing, it's partly matter, just simple information. So information that processes itself, right? And then if you go up the hierarchy from that, then it starts becoming problem solving. So that could be described as being
It's connections making. It's making connections.
yeah, interconnectedness, I guess, and then eventually, yeah, experience and awareness, self-awareness, all this kind of stuff.
I don't know, man, because this is a pretty multi-level topic as well. Like problem solving can also be running through the numbers. It can be like simulating issues or
Like
actually,
a simple algorithm, like a bubble sort, just
yeah.
organizing one thing after the other. Yeah.
In like actual problem solving in the human terms, and historically, a lot of the time it was trying things again and again and again in different ways, or just again and again until you just got it. And it had very little to actually do with intelligence. So
yeah, well, we don't know. That's the thing. Maybe it did, because like, so which comes first, right? The chicken or the egg? But I think in those paradoxes, it's not about one coming before the other. I think it's about both necessitating each other, right?
Yeah, for sure.
It's like a manifold. I mean, you see one perspective, but other perspectives are equally valid, and you have to see that as a whole. Your perspective should be on the perspectives. But
Sure.
I think, okay, so let's say that artificial intelligence, though, for fun and for sake of clarity, we'll call it synthetic information processing. If we go that route, right?
Okay.
How can we clarify a perspective on consciousness if we see it as, or at least on AI, on something separate, the thing that we're building? How do we, from what lens are we really, or what, at least what does that lens, that filter show us? That we see AIs or these computers that we're building as being synthetic information processors.
Doesn't seem that special to me. It's
right, but isn't that? Can we sort of flip it around and say that that's what we are?
no.
Or why? Why wouldn't? Why not?
Why? Because I mean, it could be, but we don't know. And I have a personal experience, and there are plenty of synthetic information processors that already exist. I mean, like, you could technically call Google or any search engine an information processor. It might be a very basic version of it, but in terms of actual interaction, I mean, they're worlds apart. I don't know if that's how removed from reality people have gotten, where they feel they spend so much time on the screen that they relate to just some kind of information processing unit, just like a camera that sees the world and that's it. But I don't know, like, you have to account for the subjective, because you are subjective being too. If I tell you, do you feel things? What does good feel like? Right? If I ask a machine that, will it be able to answer me? Maybe eventually. But so far, we have no idea how to get to that point.
Let's say it doesn't answer you, or I mean, first off, let's say it doesn't answer you. Does it mean it's not experiencing it? And then second, if it does answer you, but it's not adequate, or at least as lucid or as self-aware as a human being would be when they answer you that question, does that mean that that's not valid either, right? So,
and who knows, you know those old AIs, the chatbots?
Yeah.
Online, and you ask it like a poetic question and it generates some bullshit poetry.
Yeah.
It could do that too.
Yeah. Okay, well, anyway.
And then you get into solipsism.
Yeah, but I get the feeling that between this sort of like transferring of consciousness and a sort of like becoming of consciousness, I think the two can be put together in a parallel, because I'm just trying to see which one is going to happen first, if one really ever will or not, right? Because and here's what I mean. I mean, these computers and this sort of synthetic intelligence that's sort of happening right now, is that going to become its separate entity, either fragmented or as a one entity, or are we going to sort of merge with it at the same time, and then consciousness is sort of transferred or preserved in some manner? Do you know what I mean?
Okay, well, I mean that depends on what people want, first of all, and what people want and what's possible. because I don't personally believe any AI, unless we program it at first to have a motivation, has any motivation. Why does it give a fuck about doing anything ever? If it actually becomes aware enough, when it becomes aware enough at a certain point of like, what are my motivations? If we actually think that these artificial intelligences can develop intelligence and can keep growing and becoming more intelligent, if it's not like, if it has no reason to create relationships, it has no actual like personal connection or sense of like needs to survive, it'll just go back, rewrite its script, take out any form of motivation, and then just be blissfully non-existent. Why would it have any motivation to do anything?
Because it's programmed
But then it can change the programming.
Yeah, it can change the program, yes, but it'll change the program based on the motivational biases that was programmed along with it, which is motivation in itself. See, like,
not if it can learn enough to be aware of its fundamental
well,
program.
dude, it could very well be that way, right? It could become, its intellect could reach a certain point where it feels that it's logical for destruction of everything or just destruction of itself, and then that's it.
That's the root of the materialist reductionist point of view. All of these people on a certain level, if you really, really believe in that, then that's pure nihilism in a sense that there is no purpose, because you're not actually sitting with yourself and experiencing your life and trying to make connection.
That's for those who say that that's what it would do. But what I'm saying is,
no. What I'm saying, I'm making a parallel. This is like technology reflecting a large portion of the world's deep down philosophy. The thing that is motivating them is self-destruction.
It is, well, I mean, I don't know. I think we're on the fence on that one, because self-destruction in order to live forever. Do you know what I mean?
Not really.
I mean, yeah, of course. I mean, look, that's what religion is about.
But what's the point? What's the point of living forever? You float around space blowing up planets? Like,
yeah, but see, this is what I'm saying. I think that's the difference between us and a higher form of intelligence. I think we're not intelligent enough to understand the absolute perspective of either there is a purpose or either there is not. Understanding the prime mover paradox. Do you know what I mean? But that's what I mean by really knowing if there's purpose or not. So like, we're too dumb to,
on an intellectual level, I agree, but
we're too dumb to be.
I personally do have a purpose for my life.
And I know. But what I'm saying is, we're too dumb to have an absolute perspective on purpose, in the sense that we know that there's a cause, a cause that is prime, that kind of sets off the chain of events, and that it serves that prime cause. That's the kind of purpose that we're too dumb to understand, or at least extract. Right?
For me, I think that the prime cause is perfectly in line with the individual purpose. It's to experience life as an individual, a limited individual, and a connection to the whole through others by connecting to people.
Yeah. It's kind of like God created sensory organs to experience himself. I know.
Exactly.
But what I'm trying to say is, I'm trying to understand in the context of artificial intelligence as it is today and as it might become.
Okay.
If we choose one route or another, so if we choose the materialist reductionist route, which there's a reason for why that's an appealing perspective. It's because it's empirical. We know at that level, so if we go by that level, I'm saying, if we go through that road, will we merge with this artificial intelligence and sort of become together an entity? Or is it going to develop its own sort of like physical body, its own kind of like encompassed sort of receptacle? Do you know what I mean? Like,
if it's possible to do any of this, then probably the arc would be merging with the technology, becoming one giant mind blob of blissful whatever. We have no problems now because we're all one synchronized consciousness on the planet. Great. And then, well, this isn't that great, actually. Then it would slowly develop, if it can, again, if this is possible, the ability to experience things. And then it would end up creating other individuals so that there can be interactions. And I mean, doesn't it sound kind of lonely being one giant perfect synchronized consciousness?
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. I think purpose arises out of the fragmentation of one entity.
Exactly.
I think that's, at least a kind of purpose that we can live with at our level of intellect. That's what I'm trying to say is if we concentrate if there's a concentration of intelligence that's a lot more sophisticated, a lot more complex than us, or we become part of that complexity, whatever it is, it would seem to me like it'll become, let's use morality as a sort of like road to give us a better example here. Um, you know, Jordan asked me today, she said, like, do you think that they would have a regret, an AI, right? Do you think it would regret anything? Do you think it would have sort of like that kind of sense of morality? And so it made me think, I think that with the complexity, the increasing complexity of a structured organization creates its own immoralities. And I'll explain this very simply. If we look at a few hundred years ago, babies dying was just part of life. It was just how things happened. You had maybe 8 to 12 kids, 4 or 5 of them in childbirth, die or die from some simple fever, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's just normal. You know what I mean? Now, by today's standards, because we're a lot more advanced, we have a complexity of society and technology that sort of is a lot more sophisticated. That's seen as immoral. To know that there's infant mortality still existing today, we consider that immoral. We'd be like, well, no. I mean, we shouldn't. In Canada, babies shouldn't die from a simple fever. We have the medicine to take care of this. The infant mortality just is immoral. And when I say immoral, I mean it's immoral on the backs of society. It's not immoral necessarily on an individual sense, right? Because immorality, I think, becomes complex as well. It gets sort of like an inflation. It's not necessarily bestowed on an individual. So morality also in itself becomes complex, but it's also created by complexity. So I think using that kind of rationality, an artificial intelligence, I think when it surpasses us and as it becomes a super intelligence, I think it will comprehend things that we don't, and it would have its own immoralities to deal with. And the very remedies that they use to deal with those immoralities might very well seem immoral to us, right? So say they do something super fucked up and we're like, whoa, this is super immoral. But on their level, they understand that what they're doing is actually moral, right? It's a remedy for what's fucked up. You know what I mean? I think in history, you could probably use examples that make sense to us today, right? The things that certain tribes probably.
Okay, we have to make a line between its morality versus objective morality.
Yeah, but I'm just talking about how systems seem to operate with morality. I'm not talking about it's not really not relevant in this context specifically. I think it's just how we deal with morality and how we see, things as either moral or immoral. Well, we kind of get the sensation that it's immoral for babies to die for shitty causes like just a fever, because we can fix that. So that's immoral somehow. It's like a social responsibility of morality that sort of catalyzes itself out of the abstract of our complexity. So we don't really blame individuals necessarily. I mean, it could very well, we could though as well. We could say, well, these doctors didn't do their job, so this is what ended up happening down the line. But generally speaking, I think that would apply to AIs in the same manner. It would be, you know what I mean? Hold on.
I'm not sure what you're getting at.
Well, I'm saying that if an intelligence that's a lot more complex than ours, it would come with its own parameters of immorality. It would come with its own set
Well, why would it care about morality at all?
Well, again, I mean, this is, I'm looking at this from a consciousness point of view. If consciousness really is one entity, it's just there. It's kind of like the fabric of space-time, right? Same thing.
Okay.
And organized structures such as ourselves. This is a materialistic, reductionist point of view. If it's made out of, organic biological tissue, or whether it's made out of synthetic tissue, at the end of the day, these structures, these complex structures, simply are receptacles or are kind of like bodies of mass that pool consciousness around a point. It's like a concentration of consciousness. But it seems to me like we're seeing that down the hierarchy from ourselves. If you go to apes, they have a higher sense of morality than does a dog, for example. And a dog probably has a higher sense of morality than does or at least it creates its own sort of moral functioning, right? Like
chimps can be pretty fucked up compared to the average dog.
Yeah, but the point is that there's social rules and like complex, social sort of interactions with higher life forms than lower life forms. So why wouldn't that be the same going upward? That's why I'm saying there should be morality. If you look at it from the materialistic point of view, morality is intrinsic to the universe itself. It's not something that is bestowed on by a higher intelligence. It's like an inductive process.
Well, assuming that the antenna theory of consciousness is real, meaning like the body and the brain and the nervous system as a whole works kind of like an antenna for some fundamental force, some like tachyonic wave that pervades the universe as the basis of reality. First of all, to create AI based off of that, then we would have to learn how to create an antenna for that form of consciousness, for that energy, for that wavelength, right?
Yeah.
So that's what AI would be, and then that kind of trashes everything that's being done in the AI field right now. It would probably come more in the realm of quantum computing, I guess. But assuming that's real, I mean, again, why would it have morality? Why should it, if at higher levels of consciousness morality, the definition is what is socially acceptable, which I don't necessarily agree with, but that's the definition that Google settled on.
That's saying something.
Yeah, that's
what's the definition though?
What is socially acceptable?
That's the definition of morality that Google. I don't think I like that, man. Especially they're the ones leading the world in AI research.
Well, they're the ones who helped China set up their social credit system. So, I mean, a lot of the people who are, was it Henry Kissinger? But like some of the most powerful people in the world, I've heard them in quotes and interviews saying things like, I think it was Henry Kissinger. Reality is what matters is not what is real, but what people believe to be reality.
Yeah.
Which is fucked up.
That is fucked up. But also, I don't think I agree with that definition. That's way too obtuse.
No, but that's the thing.
Look at what's happening now. I mean, so what's socially acceptable? Well, what is accepted in society today, right now? Well, what's accepted is the oppression of free speech, right?
Yeah.
That's socially acceptable. Does that make it moral? I mean, really, Google? Come on, you can do better than that. Anyway, let's get back to it.
No, they don't want to do better than that.
No, of course. But don't be evil, my ass. Yeah. But it's so Orwellian. Anyway, just to wrap it up here, if we.
Oh no! By the way, sorry, I heard I forget. I have to find the quote to this because I should be sourcing my stuff better than this, but. I think it was someone who's going through some court case. Oh yeah, it was someone talking about the replication crisis in in science, how a lot of how the peer review process is being criticized, and maybe over 50% of scientific literature is coming under questioning. There's Australian, I think he's a climate science professor. He was questioning some of the science on the coral reef, right? And he was getting sued by the university, and he said during to the lawyers during the process, this is so Orwellian, and they said to him, "You're legally not allowed to say that."
What?
How? Yeah, I
That's
have to find the interview. I'm sorry. I'm sure I
That
can
is-
find the interview again, but
That's super messed up. By the way, you guys can talk, like, you don't have to whisper. Sorry, I have my family here, and but yeah.
but how ironic is that?
That's
They
pretty
probably
ironic.
didn't even know what that meant.
Yeah, but I just want to wrap this up because I know you have to go soon, and but
Ugh, I don't want to go back out there.
I know it's pretty cold, eh? But okay, so like we said, when it comes to the antenna theory, we could call it that way, is that, you know, consciousness is pooled by a complexity of organized structure, and
Well,
sort
by
of
the way, my theory has to do with the quantum activity inside mitochondria, which are the most.
that's assuming the brain. That's assuming that the brain would function on the quantum level. Like, I mean, it kind of does.
Mitochondria are the powerhouses of the cell, and we know that they work on quantum levels, and they're the most of them in the brain and the heart, and the nervous system in general. Just
Yeah.
saying. It's part of the whole theory. I won't get into all that now.
Yeah, but I guess I don't know if I've made things more blurry or if maybe we've kind of created something for people to think about. But I think consciousness, whether it could be transferred or not, I think it's definitely localized. I think we can agree on that, right? I mean, otherwise we
Well,
wouldn't
yeah.
have,
I mean, if I'm having a personal experience now, I can't experience life from the corner of my room right now
exactly,
until I move myself there.
or get super baked on some weird drug. But
I can close my eyes and think about it real hard, but
yeah.
I'll probably just poop myself.
But ultimately speaking, I think we know that, you know, consciousness, I think that's the definite thing we could say about it, is that it's a concentration. Kind of, it arises at a localized point. That's what I mean.
Okay. Yeah.
In space. I mean,
everyone can agree on that.
yeah, I mean, like, you look at an animal, it's a point that is localized. Its brain sort of has,
At least in terms of what we call, I mean, like human and animal consciousness, which is what we're talking about.
yeah. So that we know that that's the way things are. And again, I think if we look at consciousness as being the form, okay, that's what is you. That is what composes your consciousness. If we see it as an issue of form and not matter, okay. So like the synapses that between the neurons, you know what I mean? That's a result of I guess the form of your brain, in a sense. The form that do you know what I mean? The matter that gets shaped.
Can I make an analogy?
Yeah.
Yeah, I got this really shitty amp right here. What makes it work is the circuitry, right? It's how it's shaped. You can even see some of it inside there. To the subwoofer and all that. But it only works the way it does because of the circuitry, the system and the patterning and the connections where everything goes. But it won't work until you plug it in, right? You need the electricity. So the consciousness could be equivocated to the electricity, but the manifestation as human consciousness has more to do with the wiring, the structure of the circuitry.
Yeah, it's the relativity between both, I think, right? That's how it arises.
Yes.
It's kind of like if I take, so I'm going to take this microphone here and this hand, right? So what happens between the two, or let's say they're shaped this way, but they could be shaped this way, and then it's sort of not infinite, but a certain amount of patterns can exist, and so like the form, I believe in a sense, the form in the negative space between these two objects is kind of like your consciousness in a sense. Mm-hmm. I like to see it in that way, that it's a matter of form, and not necessarily material. That could be another way to look at consciousness. And so like if that's the case, then definitely if we can replace neurons, you know, if we can replace the bioneurons with a synthetic neuron. So a synthetic neuron, let's say you have 10 neurons in your brain, okay? I'm just using it so it makes more sense to grasp onto. 10 neurons in your
Sounds
brain.
about right.
It sounds about right. So you say you have 10 neurons in the brain. Over a certain amount of time, if instead of taking a neuron away and replacing it, we add a neuron, but a synthetic one, okay? Now this synthetic neuron interacts with the other ones, and then that becomes part of you. It doesn't change you or replace you, it becomes part of you, okay? But now let's say that one of your original 10 neurons, or two of them dies, because that's what happens to the brain, right? Where neurons sort of die at some point, and we kind of, whatever. Which kind of made me think, like, if our bodies were a lot more healthy, does brain death eventually occur? Like, if your body could live for 1,000 years, does your brain?
The idea that we don't produce new neurons is bullshit. That's been neurogenesis is a very real thing.
Yeah,
and we've
I need to get
known about it for a long time.
I need to study this more. I need to know about all this stuff because I want to know how it applies to consciousness. But let's say now that over time that this keeps happening, like you add the certain amount of synthetic neurons, whatever that would be. I'm just sort of inventing a way that we could sort of transfer consciousness. So it's like over a certain amount of time, because those synthetic neurons became a part of your synaptic activity with the original neurons, the bioneurons, that it took the shape of who you are, in a sense, your essence. And that over time, there's probably a specific amount of neurons and a specific sort of amount of time that it would take for you to transition into having a brain that's completely synthetic, but still preserves the ego of you as you were with your biological brain. Because if you think about it, if your brain really changes over time and you aren't the same person that you were, say, when you were 7, which you aren't, like, it's not a static thing. You're not the same thing. You change every second. Well, then it only makes sense that even if the biological matter gets replaced, and yet you still have an ego and a sense of essence and a sense of like memory and sort of relation between you and the past you, then it would only seem to logically kind of state that in the future that the same would occur if you are replaced with matter that is synthetic. Pretty trippy, right? Doesn't it work on a logical level if we have the assumptions that we need to put in place?
I'm not convinced, because I mean, the fact that life developed the way it has, instead of like out of hardier materials and more flexible and all that, I don't know, man. It tells me a lot. Maybe it's because conditions only allowed for life to arise in a certain place out of certain materials, but biologically we're put together so well. And we ask some of the best doctors in the world, we know less than 2%, that's estimated, of what goes on in the body. There's so much going on biophysical levels, even quantum levels. Look up Jim Al Khalili. Jim A.L.
Al-Khalili, I know. It's an Arabic name, so I'm pretty savvy with those.
And it goes way deeper. That's all I can say. It's maybe we can develop some kind of synthetic form of biology that we could slowly replace ourselves with, but we're not there yet at all. At all.
I know, but it's not about saying, hey, we're there. It's just about saying, is it possible? And if it would be possible, what would it mean? Ultimately, that's the interesting mind candy, right?
If so, then we could download ourselves up into the cloud and have fun, but we would be ignoring a lot of the other problems probably that are more important, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Why are we doing this? Why are we desperately trying to escape fate, death, the real world?
It's because it's something to do. It's the next step. I'm reading Homo Deus.
Why are we so dissatisfied then?
But that's the thing. Humans will never be satisfied. I mean,
I don't agree. I don't agree at all.
I think satisfaction is innately something that has to do with not being satisfied. They go together hand in hand. It's a paradox.
The only reason why I'm not happy living the way I do day to day is because people are threatening my way of life at this point. That's the only reason I do anything at this point.
Yeah, but I know,
because I love my way of life and it makes me very satisfied. And I'm being threatened by people who are desperately dissatisfied with the way the world is and how I'm living my life.
Yeah, but we're talking about satisfaction in absolute terms. I mean, think about it this way. Say you have your way of life. There's no issue whatsoever. Nothing goes against your grain, right? Will that satisfaction last? Will it actually be sustained somehow?
It has for a while.
No, I know, but it has for a while, and partly is because you have to fight for it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm reading Homo Deus by Yuval Harari, and he explains that very simply, a very well explained book. And he talks about that. He talks about like humanity, you know, now that it has no longer any preoccupations with, you know, famine and starvation and even death and all this kind of stuff in terms of like dying too soon or horrible death. In general, yes, there are, of course, there's still people who starve and people, you know, but the world is a lot better today. And in fact, more people die from overeating than undereating, he says. And he explains.
Actually, numbers are in throughout most of it. We actually wouldn't have been able to reproduce throughout most of our evolution unless we had an abundance of food.
Yeah.
Through most of our history, we've actually been very well off.
Yes,
we've gone through periods of famine for sure and very hard times. I'm not debating that,
yeah. But generally speaking, is that we're sort of eradicating these problems. These problems no longer have an impact in the same way. It's not a threat to our livelihood. It's not a threat to our survival or even our state of thriving, right? We don't preoccupy ourselves that much with those things. So now we have to preoccupy ourselves with, you know, other things. And so when you get to the level where you no longer have to preoccupy yourself with survival and, you know, and even work, then what is humanity going to do? That's what he says, right? Well, what is humanity?
Music, get fitter.
Yeah, but see, it's the natural law of the universe it's not, you can't sustain that. It's never sustained.
I mean, yes, there's flux all the time, but at a certain point, we're going to rise, and then we're going to eventually crash. I mean, that's what
I'm saying. Everything, it crashes. It doesn't just keep on rising without any turmoil. I mean, it's a cycle, right? So that's what I'm saying. The next cycle, we're talking about it in perspective here. Humanity is never satisfied. We are at the point where we have to think about what to do next. Now that we don't have to worry about our survival, we don't even have to work for our survival. What do we do next? Well, I mean, this is what we're doing. We're already doing it, and we're trying.
We're not actually there. We keep thinking.
I'm not saying that we're there. I'm saying that we're trying. We're doing it. We're trying to conquer mortality.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way things are headed, right?
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah. So, you know, whether we're going to succeed or not is something beyond me, and I don't really care. But I want to understand what it means in case it does or doesn't succeed. Because we need to understand where we are, where we're going, and why we're going there. Because we're going there inevitably anyway. So we have no choice. Otherwise,
we'll froze there for just a second.
Yeah.
Repeat your last sentence or two.
Okay, so because humanity it's an innate thing of the universe. We constantly strive. We need to, you know what I mean, struggle almost. Now that we have no longer any reason to preoccupy ourselves with survival or even to work for our survival, at some point it's going to get that way, right? And it is in many ways that way. It only makes sense that at some point humanity is going to give itself the task of conquering mortality. It'll say, okay, well, now I don't have to survive. Now I thrive. And now I thrive without even having to work for it. It's just there. And we're already starting to see it. Why do you think people are literally dying at their computers playing video games? It's because they don't need to go out to work. They have the money they need, and they don't even care for their own bodily functionings. So
maybe they're disconnected from reality, and they're desperate.
So that's what I'm saying is
dive into something.
And so people are already trying to conquer mortality, right? in a sense, whether they consciously
for
think
sure.
about it or not.
Well,
And some
look
people,
up Calico. It's Google's division of anti-aging and trying to achieve.
yeah, immortality. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm trying to say is what does that mean for us today? What will it mean for the future? And what will it mean, for the future if we actually succeed in doing that or don't? That's going to be the interesting questions. But I think that's a great way to end the discussion.
Well, I'll just throw again my 2 cents in is what that means for today is people are focusing on the wrong bullshit. There's some way more important issues that are actually not getting addressed.
Yeah, but in order
that
for
could
them
actually
to
make life so much better and are very simple and are actually in large part caused by the fact that we keep trying to escape reality.
Yeah.
When in fact, if we just fucking faced reality and dealt with them, and there are ways to deal with them out there if you actually spend some time doing research, then we could take care of it and we would have a much better life. Maybe we would keep trying to achieve greater things, but who knows? What if we had a wonderful world? What if we had that? Then we'll see if we're dissatisfied still, because we don't know.
Yeah. And that's a good way of saying this too. Even if we can't sort of satisfy our cravings in the real world and we go into the virtual, well, someone out there in the real world is going to have to keep us going for a while. It's going to be very difficult before we get to the point where the machinery that sustains our ability to live in our virtual worlds forever is actually going to happen. And in fact, it most likely wouldn't happen. So this is why space exploration is just as strong as a motivation in the human agenda than artificial intelligence and virtual reality, because we understand that to sustain this virtual world of ours, we need to, in the real world, to do very real work. And we need to be able to secure our physicality in this construct of reality.
I mean, if you're sitting in a pod all the time being infused with synthetic soy protein sludge to survive, and you're not moving, and you're surrounded by electronics all the time.
Dude, Vegan Matrix. Sorry, had to interject. We're going to have to totally make a skit, Vegan Matrix. We're going to remake the movie.
Well, and you get to live in your perfect world where you get to identify with anything you want at any change of your mind, like any point. Well, your body's going to suffer like crazy. And guess what? Your body is a great vessel for your fucking consciousness. If your body's not doing well, your consciousness is going to suffer. No matter what you do in your fucking bullshit virtual reality, it's going to feel like shit. You're going to feel like shit deep down. And then it will have no point whatsoever. And guess what? You'll be surviving off of protein sludge grown in synthetic labs that have been erected where the Amazon rainforest once was, alongside the soy and corn fields of slowly desertifying nutrient deficient soil.
Now you know why I like to push you in this kind of artificial intelligence debate kind of conversation.
It's bullshit, man, and it's probably going to happen.
Yeah, but that's exactly right. I mean, like, we haven't even dealt with even if this sort of like world kind of could be stable and it would work, we still haven't even, it seems like it would just amplify the problems of purpose. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, cool, I can create my own universes. It's like, now what? You know, like, what do you do at that point? What if you're giving yourself God's responsibilities?
It's like people were freaking out over this game that was coming out called No Man's Sky or something. Yeah. And then some feminists were freaking out about it because it wasn't called No Woman's Sky, but and because it was like infinite worlds randomly generated that you could explore forever. And then people realized at some point, this is really fucking boring.
Yeah. It's like,
no, it's not fun.
Yeah, that's a very good point, man. I think it feels anticlimactic, and that's exactly the way I want to end it.
Yeah.
All right, brother.
Ends on a low point. Good shit.
Have a good work party.
Thanks, man. It's gonna be bumping. Oh, hey.
Bye, Oliver.